The morning alarm buzzed at 5:30 a.m., just like every other day. Maria Santos rolled out of bed, her body aching from the previous day's work. She had been working at Romano's diner for 3 years now, and every single morning felt the same. Her small apartment was quiet except for the soft breathing of her mother in the next room and the distant sound of her younger brother getting ready for college. Maria looked at herself in the bathroom mirror. Dark circles under her eyes told the story of someone who worked too many hours and slept too little. Her uniform hung loose on her frame because she often skipped meals to make sure there was enough food for her family. But she forced a smile, practicing it in the mirror like she did every morning. Her customers deserved to see someone cheerful, not someone carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. The walk to Romano's diner took 15 minutes through the busy streets of downtown Chicago. Maria couldn't afford a car and the bus fare added up quickly, so she walked regardless of the weather. On cold mornings like this one, she pulled her thin jacket tighter and quickened her pace. The diner came into view with its flickering neon sign that read Romano's with the O barely lighting up anymore. Mr. Romano was already there, counting yesterday's receipts with a frown on his face. He was a good man. But the business was struggling just like everyone else in the neighborhood. The fancy restaurants a few blocks away were taking most of the customers, leaving places like Romano's to serve the working-class folks who counted every dollar. "Morning, Maria," he said without looking up. "We need to talk later about cutting some hours. Business is slow again this month." Maria's heart sank, but she nodded and tied her apron around her waist. Cutting hours meant less money, and she was already barely making ends meet. Her mother's diabetes medication cost more each month and her brother Antonio needed money for textbooks. But she couldn't think about that right now. She had customers to serve. The morning rush started around 7. Construction workers grabbed quick coffee and donuts before heading to job sites. Office workers ordered breakfast sandwiches to go. Maria moved between tables with practiced efficiency, refilling coffee cups and taking orders with that smile she had perfected in the mirror. "How's your mom doing, Maria?" asked Mrs. Peterson, a regular customer who came in every Tuesday for pancakes. "She's doing better, thank you for asking," Maria replied, though the truth was more complicated. Her mother had been having dizzy spells lately, and the doctor wanted to run more tests they couldn't afford. By noon, the lunch crowd arrived. This was Maria's busiest time, when tips could make the difference between paying the electric bill or having it shut off. She hustled between the kitchen and dining room, carrying heavy trays and staying on her feet for hours without a break. During a quiet moment, she noticed her reflection in the coffee pot. Her hair was falling out of its ponytail and sweat beaded on her forehead despite the cool weather outside. Other women her age were starting careers, buying homes, maybe even starting families. Maria was 28 and felt like she was stuck, in place, running as fast as she could just to stay where she was. The afternoon brought a different crowd. Elderly folks who made their coffee last for hours while reading newspapers. Students with laptops who ordered the cheapest thing on the menu. Maria treated them all the same, refilling water glasses and checking if they needed anything else. Around 3 o'clock, she finally got her first break. She sat in the back alley behind the diner, eating a leftover dinner roll and checking her phone. 3 missed calls from the pharmacy about her mother's prescription. A text from Antonio asking if she could help with his statistics textbook. Cost. An overdue notice from the electric company. Maria closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Sometimes she wondered what would happen if she just kept walking after her shift ended, got on a bus to somewhere warm where nobody knew her name or her problems, but the thought only lasted a moment. Her family needed her, and she had never been the type to run away from responsibility. The evening shift was usually quieter, but tonight felt different. Maria noticed more empty tables than usual, and Mr. Romano kept glancing at the cash register with worried eyes. She overheard him on the phone with his wife, talking about maybe closing early some nights to save on electricity. Around 7:30, a businessman in an expensive suit came in and sat at the corner booth. He ordered simply coffee and apple pie, and seemed content to work on his laptop while he ate. Maria had seen plenty of wealthy customers before, usually passing through the neighborhood on their way to somewhere more important. They rarely stayed long or tipped well, But this man was different. He said please and thank you, made eye contact when she spoke to him, and didn't seem in any hurry to leave. When she refilled his coffee, he asked how her day was going, and something in his voice suggested he actually wanted to know the answer. "It's been good, thank you," she said automatically, the response she gave to every customer who asked. As the evening wound down, Maria began cleaning tables and restocking supplies for tomorrow. Her feet throbbed in her worn-out shoes and her lower back ached from bending over tables all day. But she had made $43 in tips, which was better than some days. The businessman finished his pie and left exact change plus a $20 tip. Maria stared at the money in surprise. $20 was more than she usually made in tips during an entire evening shift. She looked toward the door, but he was already gone. Walking home that night, Maria thought about the stranger's kindness. $20 might not seem like much to someone wearing a suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent. But to her, it meant she could pick up her mother's prescription without having to choose between that and groceries. At home, she found her mother watching television in the living room, wrapped in the blanket Maria had bought her last Christmas. Antonio was at the kitchen table surrounded by textbooks and empty coffee cups. "How was work today, mija?" her mother asked. "Good," Maria said, kissing her forehead. "A customer left a really nice tip tonight." She didn't mention the conversation with Mr. Romano about cutting hours or the overdue bills or the constant worry that kept her awake at night. Her family had their own struggles and they didn't need to carry hers too. Later, lying in bed, Maria stared at the ceiling and thought about tomorrow. Another early morning, another day of serving coffee and clearing tables, another day of stretching every dollar until it screamed. But also another day of taking care of the people she loved. Another day of small kindnesses from customers like the businessman. Another day of proving to herself that she was stronger than her circumstances. She didn't know that her life was about to change in ways she never could have imagined. She didn't know that her simple acts of kindness were being noticed by someone who had the power to transform everything. All she knew was that tomorrow would bring another chance to keep going, and for Maria Santos that was enough. Tommy Martinez pressed his small face against the cold glass window of Romano's diner, his breath creating little fog circles that he would wipe away with his sleeve. It was Tuesday afternoon, and school had ended 20 minutes ago. While other kids his age ran home to snacks and cartoons, Tommy had developed a different routine. He would walk the 6 blocks from Lincoln Elementary to this little diner and watch people eat. The 8-year-old boy stood on his tiptoes to get a better view inside. He watched as customers cut into thick sandwiches, steam rising from bowls of soup, and waitresses carrying plates piled high with food. His stomach made a low rumbling sound that seemed loud in the quiet street. Tommy pressed his hand against his belly, trying to make the feeling go away. His clothes hung loose on his thin frame. The jeans were hand-me-downs from a neighbor's older son, held up with a belt that wrapped around his waist twice. His sneakers had holes near the toes, and he had learned to step carefully around puddles to keep his socks dry. The winter coat he wore was too big, making him look even smaller than he already was. Tommy had been coming to this spot for 3 weeks now. It started by accident when he got lost walking home from school and ended up on this street. The warm light from the diner windows had drawn him in, and the smell of fresh bread and cooking food made him stop and look. Now it had become part of his daily routine, something to look forward to during the long hours between lunch at school and whatever small dinner his mother might manage to put together. Inside the diner, he could see the waitress with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. She moved quickly between tables, always smiling at customers, always seeming to know exactly what they needed. Tommy had been watching her for weeks now, and he noticed how she remembered people's names and asked about their families. She seemed kind, the way his mother was kind, but with an energy his mother hadn't had in a long time. A family sat at the table closest to the window where Tommy stood, 2 parents and a little girl about his age. The girl was complaining about her grilled cheese sandwich, pushing it around her plate without eating it. Tommy watched as she left half of it untouched, along with most of her tomato soup. The waitress cleared the table, scraping the leftover food into a bus tub. Tommy's hands pressed harder against the glass as he watched all that food disappear. The cold was starting to seep through his thin coat, but Tommy didn't want to leave yet. Sometimes, people would notice him standing there and give him strange looks, but most folks just walked by without seeing him at all. He had gotten good at being invisible, at finding corners and doorways where he could watch without bothering anyone. His mother, Carmen, worked 3 jobs to keep their small apartment. She cleaned offices early in the morning before Tommy woke. Up, worked at a laundromat during the day, and cleaned a restaurant kitchen 3 nights a week. Tommy had learned not to ask for things because he could see the worry lines around her eyes getting deeper each month. When he did ask for something, even something small like a candy bar at the grocery store, her face would get that look that made him feel guilty for wanting anything at all. At home, their refrigerator usually held milk that was close to expiring, some bread and whatever vegetables were on sale that week. Tommy had gotten used to feeling hungry. It was just part of life, like having shoes that were too big or wearing the same 3 shirts to school every week. But standing outside this diner, smelling the food and watching people eat without thinking about it, made the hunger feel sharper, somehow. A man in a business suit walked past Tommy without looking at him, then an elderly woman with a small dog, then a teenager talking loudly on her phone. Tommy was used to being overlooked, but sometimes he wondered what it would be like to be the kind of person that others noticed and cared about. The waitress appeared at the window, wiping down the table where the family had been sitting. For just a moment, her eyes met Tommy's through the glass. He expected her to look away or maybe make a gesture for him to move along like the store owners sometimes did. Instead, she smiled at him, not a fake smile like adults sometimes gave to children they didn't know, but a real smile that reached her eyes. Tommy lifted his hand in a small wave, unsure if he should. The waitress waved back, then said something to another worker inside. A few minutes later, she came outside through the front door of the diner. "Hi there," she said, her voice gentle. "I'm Maria. I work here. What's your name?" "Tommy," he said quietly, suddenly feeling embarrassed about his too big coat and worn-out shoes. "It's nice to meet you, Tommy. I've seen you walking by here before. Do you live around here?" Tommy nodded toward the direction of his apartment building several blocks away. "I walk home from school this way sometimes." Maria looked at him more closely, and Tommy wondered if she could tell he was hungry just by looking at him. His mother always said he was too skinny, that she wished she could feed him more, but there was only so much money to go around. "You know what, Tommy? We made way too much soup today and we're probably going to have to throw some away. Would you maybe want to help us out and have some? It seems like such a waste to just throw good food in the garbage." Tommy's eyes widened. He knew she was probably just being nice, that the soup wasn't really going to be thrown away, but he nodded anyway. The kindness in her voice made him feel like maybe it was okay to accept help sometimes. Maria led him inside the warm diner, and the smell of food hit him like a wave. His stomach responded with another loud rumble, and he put his hand over it, embarrassed. But Maria just smiled and guided him to a small booth in the corner. "How about some chicken noodle soup and a grilled cheese sandwich? Does that sound good?" Tommy nodded, not trusting his voice. He slid into the booth, which felt like the most comfortable place he had ever sat. The vinyl seats were cracked and patched with tape, but to Tommy it felt luxurious. He looked around at the other customers, wondering if they knew how lucky they were to be able to come to places like this whenever they wanted. When Maria brought the food, Tommy stared at it for a long moment before picking up the spoon. The soup was hot and full of vegetables and tender chicken. The grilled cheese sandwich was golden brown and crispy, with cheese that stretched when he pulled it apart. He ate slowly, trying to make it last, trying to remember every bite so he could think about it later when he was hungry again. "Thank you," he said when he finished, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're very welcome, Tommy. Maybe I'll see you around again sometime." Walking home that evening, Tommy felt different, not just because his stomach was full for the first time in weeks, but because someone had noticed him, someone had cared, enough to invite him inside and share food with him. His mother had always taught him that there were good people in the world, but it had been a long time since he had met one. He decided he would come back on Thursday just to see if Maria was working, not to ask for food, but just to wave and say hello. But deep down he hoped she might notice him again, might remember his name, might have another bowl of soup that would otherwise go to waste. Tommy didn't know that his simple presence at that window was touching something deep in Maria's heart, reminding her of why kindness mattered even when life was hard. And he certainly didn't know that someone else had been watching this entire exchange, someone whose life had been changed by witnessing such pure, selfless compassion. Robert Chen sat in the back corner booth of Romano's Diner, the same spot he had claimed as his own for the past month. His laptop was open in front of him, displaying quarterly reports and financial projections, but his attention kept drifting to the life unfolding around him in this humble restaurant. 3 months ago, Robert had been living a completely different reality. His days were filled with back-to-back board meetings, international conference calls, and high-stakes business decisions that affected thousands of employees across his tech empire. He owned 3 homes, drove cars worth more than most people's annual salaries, and hadn't eaten at a place like Romano's Diner since his college days 30 years earlier. Then came the heart attack. Not a massive one, but serious enough to land him in the hospital for 5 days and force him to confront some uncomfortable truths about his life. The cardiologist, Dr. Williams, had been blunt with him. "Your body is telling you to slow down, Robert. All the money in the world won't help you if you're dead by 55. The recovery period had been the longest Robert had gone without, working 16-hour days since he started his first company. His wife had left him 2 years earlier, tired of competing with his business for attention. His adult children called dutifully once a week but seemed like strangers when they talked. He realized that despite all his success, he felt completely alone. Dr. Williams had recommended more than just medication and exercise. "Find something that brings you peace," he had said. "Something real. Something that reminds you why life is worth living." That's how Robert ended up discovering Romano's Diner. He had been driving through different neighborhoods looking for something authentic, something far removed from the corporate dining rooms and expensive restaurants that had become his normal world. The flickering neon sign and modest storefront had caught his attention, and he decided to stop. The first thing he noticed was how different it felt from the places he usually ate. No valet parking, no waiters in bow ties, no wine list thicker than a phone book. Just simple food served by people who seemed to actually care about their customers. The coffee was stronger than what his personal assistant usually brought him, and the apple pie tasted like something his grandmother might have made. But it was Maria who really captured his attention. Not in a romantic way. Robert was old enough to be her father. But because of the way she moved through the diner with such genuine care for everyone around her. She remembered customers' names, asked about their families, and treated everyone with the same respect regardless of whether they ordered the most expensive item on the menu or just nursed a single cup of coffee for an hour. Robert had spent decades in boardrooms where people said whatever they thought he wanted to hear, where smiles were calculated and kindness was a strategy. Watching Maria, he realized he had almost forgotten what authentic human compassion looked like. He started coming to the diner 3 times a week, always choosing the same corner booth where he could observe without being obvious about it. He told himself he was just taking a break from the office, getting away from the stress that had nearly killed him. But the truth was, he was fascinated by the small dramas and genuine connections he witnessed in this ordinary place. There was Mrs. Peterson, the elderly woman who came in every Tuesday for pancakes and always had stories about her grandchildren. There was Carlos, the construction worker who Maria always made sure got extra coffee because he worked double shifts. There was the college student who counted his change carefully before ordering, and Maria would sometimes accidentally bring him extra fries. But it was Tommy who really caught Robert's attention. The first time he saw the boy standing outside the window, Robert felt something stir in his chest that he hadn't experienced in years. The kid reminded him of himself at that age, when his family had struggled to make ends meet in a free school. Lunch was sometimes the only real meal he got all day. Robert watched as Tommy pressed his face against the glass, his thin frame barely visible inside his oversized coat. He saw the hunger in the boy's eyes, the way he watched people eat with such intense focus. It brought back memories Robert had buried under decades of success and wealth. When Maria first noticed Tommy and went outside to talk to him, Robert leaned forward in his booth, straining to hear their conversation. He watched as she invited the boy inside, saw the careful way she presented it as doing her a favor rather than charity. The kindness was so natural, so unconditional, that Robert felt his throat tighten with unexpected emotion. Over the following weeks, Robert began timing his visits to coincide with Tommy's after-school appearances. He watched as their relationship developed, how Maria would always have leftover soup or a sandwich that needed to be eaten. He noticed how she never made Tommy feel ashamed or different, how she treated him with the same dignity she showed every customer. What struck Robert most was that Maria clearly didn't have much money herself. Her uniform was worn and mended, her shoes were old, and he had overheard her making phone calls about overdue bills during her breaks. Yet she was sharing what little she had with a child who had even less. There was no publicity, no tax write-off, no recognition, just pure human kindness. Robert found himself researching Maria's situation, though he was careful to be discreet about it. He learned about her sick mother, her brother's college expenses, and the family's constant financial struggles. He discovered that she often worked double shifts and that Mr. Romano had been cutting hours because business was slow. The more he learned, the more ashamed Robert felt about his own life. He had donated millions to charity over the years, but most of it had been for tax purposes or public relations. He wrote checks to causes he never really thought about, attended fundraising galas where the cost of his table could have fed a family for months. But when was the last time he had actually looked into the eyes of someone who needed help? Tommy's story was even more heartbreaking. His mother worked 3 jobs just to keep their small apartment, often leaving Tommy alone in the evenings. The boy was bright and curious, but how could he focus on homework when he was hungry? How could he dream about the future when he was worried about having enough to eat today? Robert began to see parallels to his own childhood that he had long forgotten. His grandmother had raised him after his parents died in a car accident when he was 12. She worked as a seamstress, taking in alterations and mending clothes for neighbors to make ends meet. There had been many nights when she went without dinner so that Robert could eat. One evening, as Robert watched Maria serve Tommy a bowl of soup and sit with him while he ate, he was transported back to his grandmother's kitchen. He remembered how she would tell him stories while he ate, how she made their small meals feel like feasts through the sheer force of her love and attention. His grandmother had died just before his first company went public, before he could really take care of her the way she had taken care of him. He had thrown himself into work after her funeral, building an empire partly to honor her memory but mostly to avoid dealing with the grief of losing the one person who had loved him unconditionally. Watching Maria with Tommy, Robert realized he had spent 30 years trying to fill a hole in his heart with money and success. But what he really missed was the simple human connection his grandmother had shown him. The way she had seen potential in a scared, orphaned boy and nurtured it with patience and love. Robert closed his laptop and sat back in the booth, no longer pretending to work. He was witnessing something rare and precious, genuine love in action. Maria wasn't feeding Tommy because it made her feel good about herself or because someone was watching. She did it because a child was hungry and she had food to share. It was that simple and that profound. As the weeks passed, Robert found himself looking forward to these quiet observations more than any business meeting or corporate achievement. He was learning something about himself, about what really mattered, about the kind of person he wanted to be in whatever years he had left. He didn't know yet what he would do with this knowledge, but he knew his life was about to change in ways he couldn't imagine. Watching Maria and Tommy had awakened something in him that had been sleeping for far too long, something that felt suspiciously like hope. Robert Chen couldn't stop thinking about what he had witnessed at Romano's diner. Days would pass between his visits, but his mind kept returning to the image of Maria, carefully placing a bowl of soup in front of Tommy, the gentle way she spoke to him and the pure gratitude that lit up the boy's face. It had been 2 weeks since he first saw their interaction, and something inside him knew he needed to understand more about their lives. On a quiet Saturday morning, Robert found himself driving through Maria's neighborhood instead of heading to his usual country club. He told himself he was just curious about the area, but deep down he knew he was looking for answers to questions that had been keeping him awake at night. How could someone with so little give so much? What kind of Person puts their own needs aside to help a stranger's child. The neighborhood was far different from Robert's gated community in the suburbs. Small apartment buildings lined the streets, most of them needing fresh paint and repairs. Corner stores had bars on their windows, and many of the cars parked along. The curbs had seen better days, but there was life here that Robert's sterile neighborhood lacked. Children played on sidewalks, neighbors called to each other from stoops, and small businesses served the community with pride despite their modest appearances. Robert parked his expensive sedan and walked into a local grocery store, feeling somewhat out of place in his tailored suit. The elderly man behind the counter looked at him curiously but greeted him warmly. Robert bought a newspaper he didn't need and struck up a conversation about the neighborhood. "Been living here 40 years, the store owner said, his accent thick with the cadence of someone who had immigrated decades earlier. "Good people here, work hard, help each other. Not much money but rich in other ways, you know." "Do you know a woman named Maria Santos? She works at Romano's Diner." The man's face brightened immediately. "Maria? Of course. Sweet girl. Takes care of her mama and helps her brother through college. Never asks for anything, that one." "Why you asking?" Robert made up a story about possibly offering her a job, and the store owner was happy to share what he knew. Maria's mother had diabetes and needed expensive medication. Her brother Antonio was studying engineering but struggled to afford books and supplies. Maria worked extra shifts whenever possible and never complained about anything. "She comes in here sometimes, counts her money twice before buying groceries," the store owner continued. "Always buys for her family first, herself last. Good heart, that girl. World needs more people like her." Over the next few days, Robert found himself conducting what he privately called his investigation, though it felt more like piecing together a puzzle that revealed the depth of human resilience and kindness. He spoke with other business owners in the area, always carefully, never revealing his true identity or wealth. At the pharmacy 2 blocks from Maria's apartment, the pharmacist mentioned how Maria sometimes had to split her mother's prescriptions, buying half the medication when money was tight and coming back for the rest when she got paid. "Makes my heart hurt," the pharmacist said, shaking her head. "That girl works so hard, but the system makes it nearly impossible for people like her to get ahead." Robert learned that Maria's mother, Isabella, had been a seamstress before her health declined. She had raised Maria and Antonio alone after their father died in a construction accident when Maria was 16. The family had never recovered financially from losing their primary income, and Maria had dropped out of community college to work full-time and support them. The more Robert discovered, the more amazed he became at Maria's strength and character. She had been dealt circumstances that would have broken many people, yet she faced each day with optimism and generosity. She wasn't just surviving, she was lifting others up along the way. His investigation into Tommy's situation was equally revealing and heartbreaking. The boy's mother, Carmen, cleaned office buildings from 4 a.m. to 8 a.m., worked at a laundromat from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., and then cleaned a restaurant kitchen 3 evenings a week. Despite working nearly 60 hours a week across 3 jobs, she barely made enough to cover rent and basic necessities. Robert spoke with Tommy's teacher at Lincoln Elementary, introducing himself as someone interested in supporting local educational programs. Mrs. Rodriguez spoke highly of Tommy's intelligence and curiosity, but worried about his ability to concentrate in class. "He's a very bright boy, but I can tell when he's hungry," she said sadly. "Some days he puts his head down on his desk during afternoon lessons, and I know it's not because he's lazy. The free lunch program helps, but that's often his only real meal of the day. I've started keeping crackers in my desk drawer just in case." The teacher's words hit Robert like a physical blow. He remembered being that hungry child, remembered the shame of trying to focus on schoolwork when your stomach was empty. He thought about his own children, who had grown up with every advantage money could provide, who had never known what it felt like to go to bed hungry or worry about whether there would be breakfast in the morning. Robert's research revealed that Tommy was reading above grade level despite his circumstances. His drawings, which Mrs. Rodriguez showed Robert, displayed unusual creativity and attention to detail. This was a child with immense potential, but potential meant nothing if basic needs weren't being met. As Robert compiled this information, he began to understand the full scope of what he had witnessed at the diner. Maria wasn't just feeding a hungry child, she was probably saving him. Those meals she provided might be the difference between Tommy succeeding in school or falling behind, between him seeing possibilities for his future or giving up hope. But what struck Robert most profoundly was learning about Maria's own sacrifices. Through careful observation and discreet inquiries, he discovered that Maria often skipped her own meals to afford the extra food she gave Tommy. On the days she fed Tommy soup and sandwiches, she would go home and eat rice and beans. Sometimes, just rice if money was particularly tight. The pharmacist mentioned seeing Maria count and recount crumpled bills when paying for her mother's medication. The grocery store owner talked about how she would put items back on the shelf if her total was higher than expected. A neighbor mentioned that Maria's apartment stayed cold in winter because she kept the heat low to save money. Yet despite these hardships, Maria had somehow found room in her heart and her budget to care for Tommy. She was giving from her own need, not from her abundance. Robert realized he was witnessing a level of generosity he had never encountered in his world of corporate philanthropy and charity galas. The investigation also revealed something else. Maria had been doing this kind of thing long before Tommy appeared at the diner window. She had a reputation in the neighborhood for small acts of kindness. She would run errands for elderly neighbors, help parents by watching their children when emergencies arose, and somehow always knew when someone needed encouragement or support. Robert spent hours sitting in his car outside Romano's diner, watching the rhythm of Maria's workday. He saw how she interacted with every customer, from the businessman who barely looked up from his phone to the homeless man who sometimes came in asking for water. She treated them all with the same courtesy and respect. One evening, Robert followed Maria home from work at a distance, wanting to understand her living situation better. He watched as she stopped at 3 different places on her way home: the pharmacy to check on a prescription she couldn't yet afford, the grocery store where she bought ingredients for the cheapest possible dinner, and a small flower shop where she spent $2 on a single carnation for her mother. That flower purchase told Robert everything he needed to know about Maria's character. With money so tight that she counted every penny, she still found a way to bring beauty and joy into her mother's life. It was such a small gesture, but it revealed a heart that remained tender despite life's hardships. As Robert drove back to his mansion that night, he felt ashamed of how he had been living. His monthly car payment was more than Maria's annual income. His weekly grocery bill could have fed her family for months. He owned more shoes than she probably owned pieces of clothing. Yet she was the one making a real difference in the world, one small act of kindness at a time. The investigation had given Robert all the information he needed, but more importantly, it had shown him what was possible when someone chose love over fear, generosity over self-protection. Maria and Tommy had unknowingly become his teachers, showing him what really mattered in life. Now he just had to figure out what to do with everything he had learned. Thursday evening at Romano's diner felt different to Robert Chen as he sat in his usual corner booth. For weeks he had been planning this moment, but now that it was here, his hands were actually trembling slightly as he held his coffee cup. He had made billion-dollar business decisions without batting an eye, but somehow approaching Maria and Tommy felt like the most important thing he had ever done. Tommy had arrived at his usual time, pressing his face against the window before Maria noticed him and invited him inside. Robert watched their familiar routine unfold: Maria's warm greeting, Tommy's shy smile, the careful way she presented the food as if it were no big deal. But tonight, Robert noticed something that made his chest tighten with emotion. Maria looked thinner than usual, and when she thought no one was looking, she pressed her hand against her stomach in a way that suggested she was hungry herself. The investigation Robert had conducted over the past month had prepared him for this moment, but seeing the reality up close still affected him deeply. He had learned that Maria's mother needed surgery that the family couldn't afford. Antonio's college was threatening to drop him if he couldn't pay his outstanding balance, and Maria had been picking up extra shifts at a second job, cleaning offices late at night after her diner shifts ended. Yet here she was, serving Tommy a full meal with the same gentle kindness she had shown from the beginning. Robert had watched her count the money in her tip jar earlier, seen her face fall when she realized it wasn't enough for whatever bill she was trying to pay. But she never let that worry show when she was with Tommy. The diner was quieter than usual tonight. Only a few customers remained, and Mr. Romano was in the back office dealing with paperwork. Robert knew this was his chance, but he found himself hesitating. How do you approach someone and completely change their life? How do you explain that you've been watching them, learning about them, without sounding strange or intrusive? Tommy was nearly finished with his soup when Robert finally stood up from his booth. His legs felt unsteady as he walked toward their table, carrying a manila envelope that contained documents that would change everything. Both Maria and Tommy looked up as he approached, and Robert saw Maria's automatic smile, the one she gave to all customers. "Excuse me," Robert said, his voice softer than he intended. "I'm sorry to interrupt. My name is Robert, and I've been coming here for a while now. I was wondering if I could speak with you for just a moment." Maria glanced at Tommy, then back at Robert, her expression polite but cautious. "Of course. Is everything okay with your meal tonight?" "Everything's been perfect," Robert said, then took a deep breath. "Actually, I wanted to talk to both of you about something else. Would it be okay if I sat down?" Tommy looked curious, but not frightened, and Maria nodded toward the empty seat across from them. As Robert sat down, he noticed how Tommy instinctively moved a little closer to Maria, and how her hand gently touched the boy's shoulder in a protective gesture. "I've been watching you two," Robert began, then quickly added, "I know that might sound strange, but please let me explain. I've been coming to this diner for about a month now, and I've had the privilege of witnessing something beautiful. I've watched you, Maria, take care of this young man with such kindness and generosity, and it's moved me in ways I can't fully describe." Maria's cheeks flushed slightly, and she looked down at the table. "Oh, Tommy's just a friend. The food was going to go to waste anyway, so—" "Please," Robert said gently, "don't minimize what you've been doing. I know this food isn't going to waste. I know you've been sharing your own meals, your own money to make sure Tommy has something to eat. I've seen you skip your own lunch breaks to afford what you give him." Tommy looked up at Maria with wide eyes, as if he was just now understanding the full extent of her sacrifice. Maria's eyes filled with tears, but she tried to maintain her composure. "I don't understand," she said quietly. "Why have you been watching us? Are we in some kind of trouble?" Robert shook his head quickly. "No trouble at all. Quite the opposite, actually." He paused, trying to find the right words. "Maria, what you've been doing reminds me of someone very important, from my own childhood. My grandmother raised me after my parents died, and she taught me about real kindness through her actions, just like you're teaching Tommy." He opened the manila envelope and pulled out a letter, his hands still trembling slightly. "I've learned some things about your situation and about Tommy's family, and I'd like to help if you'll let me." Maria stiffened slightly, her pride clearly struggling with whatever was happening. "We don't need charity," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. "This isn't charity," Robert said carefully. "This is one person who was helped by kindness, trying to pass that kindness forward. Please, just let me explain." He handed Maria the letter, watching as she unfolded it with shaking hands. As she read, her eyes grew wider and wider. Tommy leaned against her arm, trying to see what was written, but Maria was too shocked to speak. "I don't understand," she finally whispered. "This says, but this can't be right. $50,000 and a job offer? But you don't even know me." "I know enough," Robert said. "I know you work 2 jobs to take care of your family. I know your mother needs surgery she can't afford. I know your brother might have to drop out of college because of money. And I know that despite all of this, you've been sharing what little you have with Tommy, because you couldn't stand to see a child go hungry." Tommy was looking between them, trying to understand what was happening. Maria wrapped her arm around him instinctively, as if she needed to protect him from disappointment if this all turned out to be some kind of mistake. "The job is real," Robert continued. I own a technology company and we're starting a new employee wellness program. I need someone who understands what it means to care about people. Someone who knows how to make others feel valued and important. The salary is 3 times what you're making now with full health benefits for your entire family. Maria was crying now, unable to stop the tears. But why? She asked. Why would you do this for us? Robert felt his own eyes getting wet. Because 30 years ago I was Tommy. I was a hungry kid whose grandmother worked multiple jobs just to keep us alive. She died before I could really pay her back for everything she did for me. But watching you with Tommy, I realized I could honor her memory by helping someone who was doing for another child what she did for me. He turned to Tommy, who was watching everything with wide, serious eyes. And for you, young man, there's a scholarship fund that will make sure you can focus on school instead of worrying about being hungry. Your mom won't have to work 3 jobs anymore, and you'll have everything you need to succeed. Tommy looked up at Maria, then back at Robert. Does this mean Maria won't have to share her food anymore? Because she'll have enough for herself too? The innocent question broke something open in Robert's chest. This child, even in the middle of his own life changing, was worried about Maria's well-being. Yes, Robert said, his voice thick with emotion. Maria will have more than enough for herself. And you'll have more than enough too. And your mom won't have to work so hard anymore. Maria was sobbing now, her hand over her mouth as she tried to process what was happening. Other customers were starting to notice, but she couldn't seem to stop crying. Tommy reached up and patted her arm gently. It's okay, Maria, he said in his small voice. Sometimes people cry when good things happen too. Mr. Romano appeared at their table, concerned about the commotion. When Robert quickly explained what was happening, the older man's eyes filled with tears as well. Maria deserves this, he said firmly. She's the best person I know. Over the next hour, as the diner emptied around them, Robert explained everything. The job would start in 2 weeks, giving Maria time to train her replacement at the diner. Tommy's scholarship would begin immediately, and someone would be in touch with his mother about the support services available to their family. Maria's mother would be able to see the specialists she needed, and Antonio could finish college without debt. I still can't believe this is real, Maria kept saying, looking at the papers Robert had given her. Things like this don't happen to people like me. They should happen more often, Robert replied. And maybe now they will. Because I have a feeling you're going to use this opportunity to help even more people. As they prepared to leave that night, Tommy hugged Robert with the fierce intensity that only children possess. Thank you for taking care of Maria, he whispered. She takes care of everyone else. Maria's hug was longer, and Robert could feel her shoulders shaking as she cried. I don't know how to thank you, she said. Just keep being who you are. Robert told her. Keep showing the world what kindness looks like, that's all the thanks I need. Walking to their cars, Robert felt lighter than he had in years. His investigation had been successful beyond his wildest dreams. Not only had he been able to help Maria and Tommy, but they had helped him remember what really mattered in life. He had found his way back to the values his grandmother had taught him, and he knew she would be proud. 6 months later, Maria was thriving in her new role, creating programs that helped employees balance work and family life. Tommy was excelling in school,